Well, Jim Traficant, thank you very much for joining us. You're a colorful guy. I appreciate you coming on the show. I assume after these 7 years out of the political business and in prison that you've learned something about life, something important that you didn't know before. I'm just guessing. What are your attitudes now? How are they important for us to learn from? I assume you've learned something.
First of all, I'm glad to be here, Chris. I'm glad to be anywhere. I still have federales swarming around me. They won't admit that, but they're looking for every opportunity to send me back. And the main thing I learned is when I come back that I wasn't the only one in prison. It seems like this whole valley had been in prison. And I'm very upset with the fact that we have 12,000 Delphi retirees and hourly workers, salaried and hourly workers, who are going to lose their pension, have to pay into their health care, and they're going to pick up a $60 million a year factor. And when you look at the multiplication factor for this area, it's almost going to be $250 million a year just in this area alone, with a $1.5 billion loss throughout the state of Ohio. Now, let me say one thing on that. This is very important, this Delphi issue. It hit us harder than the closing of steel mills, almost. But second of all, if we can give billions and billions of dollars to banks who won't even lend it to our people unless they have $3 in the bank for every $1 they borrow, I said, why not take care of our own people? So I'm tired of seeing this money going all over the world, all this stimulus money. Stimulate this. That's what I'm saying.
Well, you still talk like a politician, like you're running for office again.
You never know, I may. I want to get the IRS, kick them in the crotch real good. I want to reform the Justice Department, who investigates themselves when they commit crimes, as they did in my case, and it's going to explode before it's over. But most importantly, I think the problem with America, no one's talking about, while they're talking about health care and all these other issues, to basically camouflage what I think is the systemic problem. We have a tax code that cannot be reformed. It must be replaced. They got to throw the tax code out, abolish the 16th Amendment, Chris, and come with a 25% fair tax, retail sales tax. Now, Dr. Dale Jorgensen up there at Harvard did a study and says there wouldn't even be an appreciable cost factor added because of the heavy burden of the tax code that's penalizing investment, killing investment, awarding dependency in this country. It's crazy. And I think we've got to start with the rudimentary problems. No one's talking about them. And they better be careful. We're all going to have clean air. We're all going to have health care. And no one's going to have a job. And everybody's losing their home, especially around here. And I expect them to do something, or I will come back down there.
You sound like a Republican.
Well, if a Republican program is good, I support it. If a Democrat program is good, I support it. If it's good for America, I'm for it, period. And this is the problem in Washington. Too many of these people walk like little lemmings over the cliff with so-called leaders. And Chris, I got to tell you something. I've never seen such weak leadership in my life. Tip O'Neill is rolling over in his grave. And now, Jim Wright may have had his problems, but I personally think he was railroaded. Jim Wright is another one. He was a speaker. When he said something, he did it. I think it's time that the Democrats now lead and quit disguising all these problems. Look at that tax code. We need a border-adjusted tax. These imports are coming in. Our trade deficit, Chris, is $700+ billion. Beam me up. How can we overcome these problems?
You know, you're talking with this populist fervor, Jim Traficant, and yet, you know, the Democratic Party and the Congress voted you out. They voted to kick you out. I mean, how do you go back into a room of politicians now and say, you guys were all wrong, I was right? All wrong. I'm the only guy in the room that's right.
I don't have to tell anybody they're wrong or right. I was targeted by the Justice Department since 1983, being the only American in history to defeat the Justice Department in a RICO trial pro se without being an attorney, and they couldn't live with that. Finally, I was the number one target in the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And let me tell you something. People are scared to death in Washington to say what's wrong with the country, because if you rile some big people, you're done. They're more concerned with perpetuity than what's good for the country. And the country's going to hell in a handbasket, Chris.
Well, let's talk.
This is a very serious problem.
Look, without getting into the specific charge against AIPAC and the others, when you sit in Congress, I want your perspective on this, because you were in STIR for 7 years. You were in Congress for 9 terms. You've got a neat perspective. Are you saying that members of Congress are basically prostitutes? That they're basically scared to death of the interest groups, scared to death of the people that buy their campaigns? Chris, what are you actually saying about the system?
Chris, years ago on the House floor, on a foreign aid debate, I called the members of the House of Representatives a bunch of political prostitutes. They demanded my words be stricken. They jumped up like 100 wounded TV evangelists. So finally I said, okay, I apologize to all those people who were offended, and to those who were not offended, I commended them. But when I went outside, there's this little stringer group, and they said, tell us what you really feel, Jim. And here's what I said, Chris. I said, I want to apologize to all the hookers in America for having associated them with the United States House of Representatives. Yeah, I think it's a big whorehouse, and I think they better start taking care of America and forget about the Mideast and start worrying about the Midwest. Forget about the borders overseas. Start working on our borders. Take a look at the trade deficit and throw out this tax code. It's killing America.
Well, let me ask you about that. Let me ask you about what you've been...
That's what I stand for.
You've been missing a few chapters in American political life. The election of Barack Obama while you were inside. And when you got out, you were watching all these teabag parties, all these town hall meetings, the birther movement. What's your reaction to the world you missed, this sort of angry American right out there? Are you part of that?
Number one, I'm speaking at a lot of these teabag party, Tea Party rallies. I think that they need a little bit of direction, but they mean well. They're upset with the country. As far as Obama's concerned, I tell these Tea Party groups to say, look, I don't think you should be going after President Obama. I think his hands are pretty much tied, and I think his heart's in the right place, and I've said that when I've spoken. But the bottom line is, no one's dealing with the problems, Chris, because if you deal with the problems, the real problems in America, you get targeted. And you know what I'm talking about. Now, I don't want to give you chills up your leg again here.
Yeah. Well, that was below you. Jim Traficant, that was below you. You can do better than that. Let me ask you about your personal situation. Now, I'm going to ask you one time only. It's a free country. You're a free man now. Let me ask you, do you believe you are in any way guilty as charged? In any way guilty as charged? In any way?
Number one, I'm not a free man, and no, I was not guilty. And now you have a juror
you were a
that's come
totally innocent man.
In any way. And when it's all over, it will come out, Chris.
How are you going to establish that fact so that people listening right now will believe it? I'm serious. How are you going to make your case? You didn't make it 7 years ago.
Chris, I'm not trying to convince anybody to believe it. Now you have juror number 8, Leo Glazer, to come out. And he's giving a lot of revelations about that whole issue. 4 of the 7 people that testified against me, now it's come out that they lied. You have a young man, black man in Nigeria by the name of Okolo, said his life was ruined. He was deported because he wouldn't commit a crime for the Justice Department and lie against Traficant. Now they're deporting his 79-year-old parents. And I'm going to say this to Washington. You should be looking into the Okolo matter. They've destroyed this man's life, and they're now attempting to destroy his 79-year-old parents because of the government's zeal to convict me. They broke every law to convict me, and before it's over, I just want them to know, I'm coming back at them, Chris.
Okay, let me ask you a final question.
This is the bottom line.
Jim, I want to ask you a final question, Congressman. You are under the law, Ohio law, permitted to run for office.
Don't call me names.
Okay, Jim, you're running. You can run for office. There's no legal reason why you can't, right?
I'm 25 years old, and I'm eligible to run. There's no restriction on me running.
What would get you to run for office again?
Number one, I'd have to look at the variables on it, Chris. There's a thing I can't imagine when I come back how well I was received. But what I never realized how well I was received around the country. And there's some talks about possible movie and several things. I don't know what's happening here. But my case is beginning to explode. People are starting to admit they were pressured to lie. Now there's going to be a microscope put on that thing. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I may run, and if I do, I want to say this right on your program. I'm going to try to abolish the Internal Revenue Service, repeal the 16th Amendment, and go right at the Justice Department, who investigates themselves when they commit a crime. Finally, if I am subpoenaed to Germany in the Demoniuk case, I'm going over, and I am appalled that not one politician in America has even looked into this man's plight. Period.
So Demoniak,
I'll go right over there,
you're sticking to your defense of Demoniak. You believe he's innocent?
Well, the first time, Chris, it was my Freedom of Information Act request that proved he wasn't Ivan. And it came from the Justice Department. And they let the Justice Department go without even being charged. This man was convicted, sentenced to death when I brought him back from Israel. Now he's over there in Germany. Israel wouldn't even charge him on this second offense. And let me say this. I want to give Israel credit because the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati wouldn't accept my evidence. Congress wouldn't hold a hearing. I sent it over to the Supreme Court in Israel, and they gave America a lesson in justice. They said, take him home, Congressman.
Okay.
Now, let me tell you something. This man is not what they're saying he is, and it's a shame that no one's even looking at his plight.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim Traficant.
I will, Chris.
Jim Traficant, thanks for coming on Hardball tonight. It's great having you.
This is Hardball. Thank you, Chris.
You speak your mind, sir.